I'm a little disappointed that you didn't fill your freezer with a turkey.
You should be.
And if I had more time today, I was going to go to the local Hannaford's and get you a butterball for doing this podcast.
You're an awfully nice boy, yeah.
Can you throw it up in the air? He likes to shoot them on the wing.
Oh,
I have done this.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
No one can save you. You better run.
Welcome back to another episode of Northwoods Whitetails podcast. Today we've got a couple special guests, Lewis Porter, Mike Snyder, and my beautiful bride, Jamie. How are we all doing?
Great.
Good.
Doing good.
Good. Lewis, can you give me a little background? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Sure, I'll give you the short version so I don't bore your listeners too much. I grew up in Calais, Vermont, and live down the road about half a mile from where I grew up, and grew up spending a lot of time outside doing different things, including fishing, hunting, and that stuff, and had a kind of a I guess they call it a patchwork career. I studied biology in college, and then I ended up going into journalism and politics, and eventually all of that sort of came together when I had the amazing opportunity from Governor Peter Shumlin to become Fish and Wildlife Commissioner. And that was sort of the job that was kind of like, oh yeah, now all of it makes sense. So I did that for 7.5 years and left 2.5 years ago. And it was the most incredible experience I could imagine. It was amazing. It was just remarkable people, fascinating issues and things to work on. I had the chance to be reappointed by another governor of a different party, which is, if your listeners know anything about state government, fairly unusual. Mike and I share that. And it was amazing. It was just an amazing experience.
That's great. Well, thank you for everything that you did.
Thanks for the invite.
I
Can't believe he left out the part about that job where he met me.
So why don't we talk a little bit about that? Let's tell everybody who you are.
Well, I'm Mike Snyder, and I'm a forester. I live in Stowe, Vermont. I've been here 30-plus years. Incidentally, one of my first friends, I like to say, was a man named Sonny Davis, Joey's grandfather. He was very kind to me right off the bat once he knew I was interested in deer hunting. In fact, he came driving by once when I was pulling a small buck out of the woods right there in the hollow, and just when he came by, and man, I couldn't have planned it any better. He was into it.
Yeah.
So, anyway, as I say, I'm a forester. I have professionally, my background is in forest science for about 15 years, and about 15 years in forest management as a consultant, as a county forester for the state, giving assistance to private landowners. And then Governor Shumlin, just like Lewis mentioned, when he became governor, I got a call from his team, and they said they were interested in having me be his Commissioner of Forests, Parks, and Recreation, a sister department to Fish and Wildlife, very closely aligned, especially the staffs and the work that they do. So it's funny. I won't dwell on it. I said no because I thought I had a great job. I did, and I thought, well, someday when my knees go and I can't roam the woods, and maybe I'll be wise and I'll be a good commissioner then. And they're like, no, we're asking you now. And long story short, they talked me into it, and I came to my senses really because, as Lewis said, it was quite something. I also transitioned from the Shumlin Administration into the Scott Administration, stayed on as commissioner, and I stayed there for 12 years. A year and a half ago, I decided to step down. So I'm back to hanging a shingle as a consulting forester, and I have a mix of consulting and advising roles now, trying to keep it less than full time so that I can focus on family and hunting and being outdoors, because that's really, to bring it full circle, that's a big part of my life and has been, and it's among the best parts of my life.
You love to hunt.
I do. I love the woods, and I'll just tell you this, I really love to hunt, particularly deer hunting. I do like turkey hunting in the spring. I'm a forester, and I'm really into the woods. I'm super into it, and have spent a lot of my life out there in a lot of different ways. And I didn't grow up hunting or having real outdoor parents and stuff, so I came to this late. And one of the things I really loved about it was whereas as a forester, you got to explain things, you got to answer questions, you got to do stuff. I really liked when I started chasing around deer, the focus. When you have a rifle in your hand and you're in the woods, it's a whole different thing. Even as a forester, it just brings a focus and a purpose that was different than any other experience I'd ever had in the woods. And I'm a guy who spent a lot of time in the woods. That was super cool to me. And every year it gets better and better. I'm not saying I get better and better, but it gets better and better. I do think I've gotten a little better as a hunter, and I think there's some evidence.
Yeah, definitely.
But the point is, it's about the woods for me, and hunting is a super way to experience the woods. And even though I still sometimes catch myself on a track and being like, wait a minute, you're tallying board feet right now or assessing the regeneration. You need to be looking for the ass end of a deer or something.
Well, usually regeneration and ass end of a deer do kind of go hand in hand.
Joey, you want to look into doing this professionally.
I
That's
don't
good.
know. I don't know.
Anyway, that's around and about, but it's the woods. I'm a forester. I live here locally. And really, it's a huge part of my life that I look back on now. In my mid-20s, I got into hunting, and it's been super.
Yeah. And you wrote a book. You're famous.
I have published a book called Woods Wise, An Exploration of Forests and Forestry. Yeah. I wrote for Northern Woodlands magazine for many years as a columnist, and then compiled a bunch of those and re-edited and put that book out, and it was very well received.
Yeah. No, it was a good book.
Thank you.
You got on to Meat Eater podcast. You got on there and talked about it.
I did. Had the distinct pleasure of joining those folks out there in Bozeman, largely to talk about the book, which we did, and then you go from there. Great experience, great folks, and they ended up selling out my book.
Yeah.
Within 2 weeks, the publisher called and said, "Were you? I guess you did a podcast or something." Because we've been having orders like crazy. How great is that?
Yeah, like the number one
incredible.
podcast in the country.
Yeah. So even if just a couple people, a small percentage of the listeners say, "Well, I'll get that book," it moves the needle.
Yeah. All right, so I'm going to ask you a question. Ranella asked you the same question.
When I didn't answer it,
Why are conifer trees shaped like a cone?
they're called it because they reproduce by cones, like pine cones and spruce cones. But the conical shape has to do with what's called apical dominance, which they loved. They all had their minds in the gutter or something. I don't know. But what it means is the top of the tree, the growing tip, the bud at the very top of the tree exerts using hormones, just chemical communication within a tree. It sends hormonal messages to the other branches below it, the subdominant branches, that you're subdominant. I'm the boss. I'm the leader. It's actually what it's called. And so it wants to make sure that it's going up because that's where the sun's at. And it's a race to the sun, beat out your competitors. As a tree, all your branches are sort of trying to work for the same team, but they have this sort of control of the growth so that you don't have one growing out here. This is a podcast, so you can't see my arm about to cuff Lewis upside the head over here. Mm-hmm. They want to go up and have this organized approach to going up and building themselves. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they're conical because the cone shape is what results from the top growing a little bit faster than all the side shoots, and they stay in balance that way. It also then has it's thought to have some competitive advantages that over millennia allow it to kind of keep it in the population, which is where they grow. Snow, heavy snow loads in particular, that's a great way to shed snow.
Shed moisture.
Yeah, and because the snow can build up and then can break the branches, and then that's no good.
Yeah.
So that's the relatively short answer. It's apical dominance, which is really fun to say.
So with the two of you being relatively close in the same office, right? You're managing for wildlife, and you're managing the forest the wildlife lives in. The two of you get along, or
That's a great question. I think our biggest disagreement was Mike always thought it was kind of silly to have different biologists for different species of animals. And I always thought it was kind of silly to have 14 different types of foresters. I mean, what's a utilization forester versus a county forester? Like, they're trees. You really just need one. So I think that was our biggest disagreement. We often joke that the two departments with one mission.
Yeah.
And the two departments were really dependent on each other. People care tremendously about wildlife. A lot of their interest in managing forests is about wildlife. So Mike's mission at Forest Parks and Rec was dependent in some ways on my mission at Fish and Wildlife, and certainly vice versa. Wildlife is all about habitat. Really, we do a lot of talking and thinking about seasons and bag limits and all that stuff. But if the habitat's there, the species that need it will be there. And so, obviously, FPR's mission was critical, remains critical to Fish and Wildlife. So I think we got along really well. There are always places where the missions of the organizations don't match perfectly, but we're both in the business of managing natural resources and also both in the business of managing recreation based on those natural resources. So I think it works pretty well between the two departments and has historically and certainly did when we were there. And the fact that we would spend a fair amount of time hunting together probably didn't hurt anything.
No, among other things. And Lewis he could have said, he should have taken credit for, there have been times, and I suspect it's still so, where the money being the way it is, Fish and Wildlife Department money really helped the Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation operations, right? So there was also some real strong assistance and cooperation in that way. Just, I won't get into all the weeds, but just know that like they're really close. Quick story, just prior to Lewis becoming commissioner, the first commissioner of Fish and Wildlife I worked with was Pat Barry. Patrick Barry is now executive director, president of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. He, on this question, I remember early on, a couple of strong personalities, Patrick and I kind of going at it a little bit over, whose turf, and we're just both new, figuring out what are our roles here. And I'll never forget the night Patrick called me and he was like, it was like, it's my forest, it's your habitat, and it's his, we're like, wait, we both kind of came to this, like, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
And things got a whole lot better once we realized. And the big mistake you could make is on the forestry side is to think forestry is about timber. It was. And it's 100 years ago, its roots that's where it was born and that's what it was about. But that's not modern forestry. It's not how it's practiced, particularly not in a public agency with public lands and having a role in private land stewardship. It's way more than just timber. It's about habitat, and mostly for the landowners. That's more what they're interested in, if anything.
How do you manage today's timber, though, with everything going against it, like houses, residential, logging, right? Like lack of logging. There's groups out there holding you back from logging, right, within certain areas.
Yeah, well, they're trying. There have been so there's decidedly there's legal action challenging the lawfulness of public lands management, including in particular timber harvesting on public lands. So that's like there's a lawsuit. So yes, I just say, and we can come back and talk plenty about that. But there's also another kind, which is maybe more insidious and it suggests where that's all coming from. It's just a general shift in the people's attitudes and beliefs and values and the demographic changes. People are no longer, simply put, fewer and fewer people are of the land and from the land, and they consider themselves to be somewhat green, aware of climate change and biodiversity loss, and they want to do something about it. And they've learned just enough to know that trees and forests are really good in protecting against climate change in a lot of ways, right? Complicated scientific ways and pretty simple, obvious ways. So their thought is, well, why would you ever cut a tree down? And definitely, why would you burn one if that's your concern? So they come from a legitimate place, but it's really kind of gone way over, where instead of realizing that the reason we have a healthy, resilient landscape that's 70-something% forested still throughout the region largely is because of the pattern of private owners working with foresters and loggers, keeping the land in the family, keeping it forested. So we've gone right past all that to, like, again, it's either wilderness or you leave everything alone. Because in particular, people lean that way because the only kind of, when they hear forestry, they think clear cutting, which is a type of silvicultural technique, but it's not even the most common one used in producing all the wood products we use in our daily lives. So there's a lot there. Yes, there are organized groups activating against timber harvesting throughout New England and definitely here in Vermont. I was named in the lawsuit when they challenged the state. That was tossed out of court, lack of standing principally. But it isn't gone. It's coming back. And what I'm saying is that's happened in other states, and they've been more successful in, say, Massachusetts and a moratorium on harvesting on public lands. But to me, it's just an example of a larger problem, which is the gap in our awareness of how much we rely on forests, where wood comes from, and if we're not going to do it here locally, where we do it really well, then you're just exporting the demand for all these different wood products, packaging to you building in your home, somewhere else where they don't have as many environmental controls or take care of the workers, and the money goes somewhere else. So it's really twisted if you think about it. But that's the problem, is we've lost the culture of forestry, which is where we come back to losing the culture of hunting and fishing and trapping. So they're the same kind of, they're twins, right? They're siblings in a sort of cultural erosion, I think, of rural culture.
And a lot of these people want this land left forever wild. Is that what you...
Yes.
So how does Lewis manage a healthy deer population or any wildlife at all in a forest that is forever wild, right? Like, we all know that deer survive off of regeneration for the most part.
Well, yeah.
Deer need regeneration to get through the most crucial 6 months out of the year, right? Like,
and there will be, in fairness, you're absolutely right, and there will be natural regeneration in a forever wild forest that's left to natural processes. So windstorms that throw over a cluster of trees, that'll regenerate, sure, and I have to say that'll happen, but some places it'll take an awful long time for that to be anywhere near functional. Yeah.
I'm going to use a deer yard, for example, right? Those hemlocks get to be how tall? How tall will a hemlock grow?
They're not, any 80 to 100 feet, probably.
100 feet,
that'd be
right?
a wicked tall one, yeah.
They get to 80 feet. We get a good windstorm. They're so tall, right? They blow over. They get chewed on for a winter. Where do those deer go? They're done. Like, there's not available habitat to sustain them through the winter months in areas, let's just say we're in Stowe, Vermont. We lose that yard over there on Traps Hill. Where did those deer go? They survive a winter until they get basically to a point where they can't sustain themselves through the winter, and they slowly die off. And that yard is nothing. There's no regeneration other than raspberry bushes in there, and there's not enough cover to hold them. How do you manage that forest for a deer yard? How long does it take for your deer yard to grow back up? I've heard 75 years.
Well, yeah, and hemlock's extremely slow growing. It takes a long time to get established, and it'll take a long time to provide thermal cover.
One of the best things that I think the Fish and Wildlife Department has done, and it existed long before I got there and has continued since I've left, is the Vermont Conservation Design Project, which is an effort by the department along with FPR and other partners to try to look at the whole state and actually beyond the state and try to figure out what we have in terms of different natural communities, what they call it, but basically different types of landscape. And I think one of the things I like best about that project is it says yes to everything, right? It says yes, wilderness areas. It says yes, old growth. It also says yes, early successional young forest. It says yes, deer yards. Yes, wetlands. Yes to all the different types of wild lands you can have, and tries to get a sense of how much we have, how much we've lost, and how much we want to have.
And it does so in this regional approach, right? It's not one size of it fits all across, because the Northeast Highlands are different than the Valley of Vermont and the Southwest corner, So this is awesome.
Exactly right. And I think that to me is that's the way I like to look at it, and both from a habitat ecology standpoint, but also from a hunting standpoint. I love to go drive from my house in Calais, where there's probably 10 to 15 deer per square mile. I love to drive to the Northeast Kingdom and hunt where there's 1 deer per square mile. Why do I like to do that? I just love being in that woods and having that experience of hunting that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I view it as both a wildlife recreation perspective and from an ecology perspective. Like, you want it all. You want it all in the mix. The interesting thing to me about Vermont conservation design is I think we will, over time, it's going to take a long time, but I think we'll achieve the goals set out there for old forest over time. Enough forest will be set aside through different various ways to achieve it. What I'm worried about is I don't think we'll achieve the early successional forest goals in that plan. Mm-hmm. And you gotta try to achieve all of it to keep what you want, both in terms of natural wild spaces for their own sake, but also for your opportunity to recreate in them. A grouse hunter might want certain habitat, a bear hunter might want different kind of habitat. You can have it all if you are thoughtful about what you do and where you do. But it takes logging in addition to areas that are set aside for no touch.
Yeah.
And that's the part that worries me as a wildlife person, a former wildlife commissioner. That's what worries me about the decline of the interest and the willingness to have forestry, and also the forest economy. You got to have mills, and you got to have loggers, and you got to have foresters, and you got to have truckers, and you got to have places to ship the end products from that, and it's all got to work just as well together as the ecology has to work together in order for it to be a functional place where you can do forestry. And Mike knows I love to talk about things I don't know about. So now I'm really going to an area I don't know anything about. But
you're doing great.
But it's not just people's attitude. It's not just people's attitude. It's the business ecology of having a timber industry.
Exactly, which includes the workforce, which is rapidly disappearing. People who work in the woods want to work in the woods. Now think about that. It's dangerous. Among the most dangerous occupations, logging on the planet. The margins are just ridiculously thin. Capital for equipment is astronomical, and it's poorly understood. It's misunderstood, and people tend to be hostile towards it. Who's signing up for all of that?
Yeah.
No wonder the young guys and gals aren't, with some really notable exceptions, they're not going into this. It's aging, and it's aging out. So no workforce. Lewis mentioned the other parts of the supply chain. The willing landowners, foresters, overseeing and being ambassadors to kind of encourage people to do this stuff. Skilled loggers. We have a handful remaining, and they're amazing. But then the truckers, the primary processing, the sawmills, and the secondary manufacturing, and all it's all of it is in contraction. That's all I'm trying to say. Lewis is right. You need that. So having these Vermont conservation design and other kind of intelligence exists, and it's awesome. And we're a hotbed of it here in the Northeast. It's incredibly progressive, and it's right. And none of it matters. Like, this expertise doesn't matter if we don't have the people to do the work, the marketplace for their wares to be circulating, and the culture of support that, if not reveres it, at least respects it. It's all going away rapidly. I cite you, stats. 60% of the mills in the last 20 years gone.
Yeah, they're gone. Loggers gone.
Going.
Cost of equipment. I mean, the cost of a fellow buncher, a brand new fellow buncher. How does someone afford that? That's like a brand new house.
It's easy. We were just in a meeting yesterday hearing about pieces of equipment that are that start at $800,000.
Yeah,
harvesters and.
You got to cut some serious timber to pay for that.
And this sets up a dynamic that's really interesting, is because then you start chasing that around, and that's not necessarily great stewardship. To be based on, we got to pay for this
production,
stuff. Right? But yes, it's really complicated. It is not simple. It's not cute. And the people that are making it still, bless them, are smart as can be, and they work wicked hard.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've got a buddy that works about 18 hours a day. He's a logger, works about 18 hours a day. He's on the job at 2 a.m. in the morning to load trucks so that those trucks can be at the mill by 6 a.m.
Yeah.
I've never never seen anybody with more of a work ethic than him.
I don't doubt it. And they're getting pinched in every way now, because there's also this business of, more and more understanding that you can't be, running a forwarder or skidder or harvester in the woods when it's soupy wet. It's not okay. So they don't do that. Well, that's more and more the conditions. In the winters, when we logged big time, they're not the same. They don't exist. I wish I could cite you the numbers, but folks keeping track, the shrinking of the days that they can actually work in the woods based on all the changed climate and everything. We all see it. This is having a direct effect. They can't work.
And then you've got that. And then you've got that house payment sitting on the landing, racking up interest.
Yeah, exactly.
Sitting there.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting days for me was when Mike and his department were working on a workers' compensation insurance bill, and I was like, "Well, I'm Fish and Wildlife Commissioner. What do I care about workers' comp insurance?" Well, no workers' comp insurance, no loggers, no timber production, no early successional habitat.
Bingo.
So, it doesn't take a lot of steps to get to anywhere. Everything's connected.
Yeah, for sure.
Great point.
Select cut, clear cut.
Yeah. Well,
what's your preferred method?
Well, I'm just going to take the gloves off now, Joey. Select cut is really, other than just very broadly, generically suggesting that some decisions were made, as opposed to a clear cut, it's a mostly useless term. And it leans towards problematic, because it just oversimplifies, and it's not what we need. So logging is a tool and a technique for implementing at its best. So it's a tool and a technique to remove trees. That could be to clear your house lot. That's logging, okay? But if it's to manage the forest for any number of things, tipping it towards your favorite game species, or tipping it towards your favorite, non-game species, or whatever, or ecological function, whatever it is, there's some approaches that logging towards some other thing for the forest. That's a tool for forestry, for forest management. Let's just start there with it. This logging is a tool. And, I'm not talking about logging for land clearing for houses. I'm not commenting on it one way or the other. That has to happen. But it's not forestry, and it's certainly not what we call silviculture, which is the idea of knowing which trees to cut and keep for what purposes. And there's a wide range of them. So now we step into the forestry side and doing silviculture, which is managing the trees or the lack of trees for the future forest, and you can have a lot of different reasons, and you get to choose that mostly, which is awesome. That sets up this whole range of what you might call select cutting types, or better, selection is a term we actually use in silviculture that really has specific meaning in terms of the distribution of the range of tree sizes by diameter out there for each species and their density. So it gets very geeky, but that's a very specific type of silviculture that's generally you could call it light touch. Okay, But then there's patch cutting, which is basically mini clear cuts and varieties of each of those. They're all select cutting. They're all we're not doing it. So again, a select cut isn't very helpful, except that it differentiates from just like clear cut everything, right? But after clear cut, which is you draw a line, you cut all the trees. Then there's clear cuts with reserves, which is maybe you leave. We did this up in Sterling Valley up here. There's a great example of it in the town forest of patch cuts, an acre, 2 acres, 2.5 maybe. But we kept big spruce trees that had seed, cherries, yellow birch, as tree makers and as habitat for songbirds and a variety of other wildlife. That's clear cutting, that's clear cutting at a small scale, and then it's which we call patch cutting, if you will, and then patch cutting with reserves. And then there's like a seed tree, which is patch cutting with even more reserves. Then a shelter wood, which is taking back half the overstory off. These are very distinct techniques, and they're based on what's out there and what you're trying to do. Which by out there, I mean what species, what sizes, what spatial arrangements, right? We make those choices. They're all selections that we make. I'm just trying to paint the broad picture from clear cut to a little less than a clear cut to patch cutting, then the different kind of retention that you keep. And then we get into this whole other end, which we call uneven aged silviculture, which is where selection systems come in, where it's like you're just tweaking the hole in the canopy here and there. You're releasing some nice trees from competition by cutting all the trees around them, but nothing else. Then there's weedings, which you're removing trees of certain species because you want it to grow up to be more for what you want, or cleanings, which are more about removing the trees that have health issues or structural, like they're not going to make good timber. Right, I'm just trying to paint a picture. There's a wicked toolbox of forestry techniques.
He's a tree nerd, isn't he?
Or you can just cut them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Lewis is big on the cut them all, let God sort it out technique. Yes, which it has its and so select.
err
You
on
want to
the
say
side of
select
Lewis.
cut. You want to say select cut. Cut them all. Yeah, it would. You know what? So I heard this guy say this once. Steve Long, one of the founders of Northern Woodlands magazine. I heard him give a talk once. Was he learning forestry on his own land? And he said, forestry, it's not rocket science. I've learned it's much harder. And he's right. If you're really doing forestry, as opposed to just whacking around in the woods, it's super complicated. And it's just gotten more complicated with climate change, with everything we know about wildlife and biodiversity, water quality protections, and now this cultural, chasm where people think it's evil. That's complicated. So I get a little wound up because we need to talk about it factually, and your listeners are a great audience. They love the woods. They're out there. We need to change the way we talk about it.
Me personally, I like the clear cut, right?
Of course you do.
I like it in certain areas. There's just so much habitat for every species of game in the areas that I pursue it, which is the north, right? It comes right down the chain, from birds to rabbits to.
But you are seeing in those places, in those clear cuts, some modernization on that land base of retention along the streams. Right, there's more green stripling there. Right, that's not the. When I was a kid, that wasn't the case. And they leaving seed trees here and there and other cavity trees. You're seeing that in those clear cuts. They have changed. They're still clear cuts, but they're tweaking them.
And remember, that's all dependent on something else being around it.
Right.
Whether that's deer yards or whether it's beech trees for bears or whether it's whatever. It's all, a lot of game species need and go to and appreciate early successional or clear-cut areas. But remember, they're almost all dependent on something else being available somewhere too.
Right. Cover,
or food
feed,
or
water,
migration routes or whatever, breeding areas, whatever. Almost all of them are dependent on something else being available around that.
Yeah.
It's just we don't think about that because the majority in Vermont is, like Mike says, middle-aged forest. So we don't really think about the patch cuts or clear cuts being, the exception in the place that draws all those species, but they draw it from somewhere else, some other habitats that they need.
Yeah. So our state lands, I had heard something about we are very, very behind in terms of cutting, like 20 years or so behind where we should be in terms of what should have already been cut. Is that true?
It's you can kind of make a case for it, but here again, it's behind, definitely behind. So just to be clear, when you mention like the state lands, what we're referring to is largely state forests that are designated as such, state parks, which are not just the campgrounds, like there's a lot of forest land, and the wildlife management areas that are cooperatively managed, even though owned by the two different departments. It's about 400,000 acres total across that ownership, spread around 5 regions of the state. What they're behind in is the plans, the management plans that say, okay, public, we take this seriously. Here's how we understand these places, maps, details of ecology, et cetera. Habitat, water resources, timber. And then here's what we hear from you that you value and what we're supposed to do with these lands and try to meet a lot of objectives. That leads to a written plan. At the end of that plan is what we're going to do in these places. And that might be a lot of different things, but most of it's driven by timber harvesting to either pay for it or get it done. And so the planning is way behind. The Worcester Range Management Unit long-range plan that's received some controversy this winter, people saying, what? Well, one of the problems with that is they haven't talked about it for 25 years. And people forget that that's what some of those places, it was, how they're used. So they're way behind for a lot of reasonable reasons, the staff, on getting these plans. They're comprehensive. You people breathing down your neck. Frankly, they're spending more of their time now responsive to freedom of information records requests from antagonists, rather than actually going out and doing inventories, mapping, and writing the plans. So they are way behind in plans, generally speaking, around the state. No catching up. Those plans call for the activities. And so you could then say, well, I guess they're behind in the cutting if you assume that there would be cutting prescribed in those plans. So does that make sense? They're way behind administratively because that's a responsibility they have, and it comes before just going around and putting paint on trees or sending a saw into a tree.
It's not just because everybody else that doesn't enjoy that forest.
I would say it's not because of antis.
Yeah.
The reason they're behind is there's lots of reasons. Lewis, you manage these wonderful people. Like, would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, there's never enough of them.
Right.
They're under incredible demands to do not only their core functions of their work, but also a lot of other things like respond to FOIAs, respond to requests for them to come talk, do whatever else, or create rules, do all the other things that are very time consuming. But I think what a lot of people don't know about our former departments, and one of the things I think is really I'm very proud of, and I think Mike is too, is these plans. These are plans put together by foresters and ecologists and biologists, by professionals like Mike used to be before he became a political appointee.
That's exactly right.
And one of my goals, and I think Mike's, was to keep all of the stuff away as much as you can from the people writing the plan and not interfere and allow temporary political considerations to come into a plan that's going to manage a forest that's going to be there forever and a plan that's going to last for decades.
Well said.
And one of the things I always like to see in those plans come forward was a consideration of what was happening on the landscape around the state lands. And if there's a place where there isn't a lot of cutting, some of those plans involve more cutting because to create that early successional habitat. If they're in a place where there is a lot of logging on private land around them, well, maybe we hold back a little bit for a couple of years and delay the work on state lands, acknowledging that the landscape has representative areas of those kind of management. So, I nobody who works for any government, including our state government, is insulated from political and public input and pressure. But I think at their best, the land planners are really focusing on their expertise, and to the extent that commissioners can keep it from them, which is not perfect, not influenced overly by the public, feeling public pressure, which ebbs and flows. It changes more rapidly than these plans change.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
So, to be clear, those plans ultimately they go to a commissioner.
Yeah, they have our signatures on them.
And so if it's a WMA, his name comes first, and this FPR commissioner be below it, or for forest, it's first. So they come to us. And I will speak for myself. I cannot remember exactly how many, but a handful of plans came to me as commissioner when they were updated. Famously, the Camel's Hump plan, which was the subject of the lawsuit. I can tell you I never rejected a plan, and I never wrote back saying, you got to change this for some political reason. I sent plans back because it was unclear or it was confusing but never
questions.
There were
always
just
questions,
and really trying to support what I could see and understand from listening to them, what they were trying to put forward. Well, if you're trying to do that, then maybe say it this way, that kind of thing. But those kind of tweaks, but not like, oh, no, we're not doing that because So I just wanted to add that they do come to us to be accountable. And I'm proud that I signed every one of those plans that came to me, some of them with some tweaks, but never like a politically oriented or motivated tweak that I request.
I've got a question for you. What in the ground, there's something with carbon within the ground. When you log it, and maybe you can't answer this, when you log a certain type of tree off the forest floor, it produces carbon. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, I'll correct you.
What produces certain type of trees that produce like grouse habitat?
Okay.
It's something. Isn't there carbon of some kind that produces certain trees?
Well,
that
we
understory is needed?
No and yes. So there's something there,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about that. And there's carbon, and we should probably talk about that. But these are being conflated a little bit. So let's go with the practical question you asked. It was like, okay, I want, would you say grouse habitat?
Yeah.
So partridge. Generally, now I'm not the wildlife biologist, but I'm the forester and worked with the biologists. And the general idea there is, this Lewis was mentioning the young forest, early successional habitat, right? Now they're also famous for being associated with popple, aspen, poplar, all the same, right? Different names, and that's a tree species that's really good at regenerating by its roots and its stump sprouts after cutting. So it's particularly suitable to like little patch cuts or clear cuts that then resprout very quickly with that same species. And that's like a guaranteed, and then you leave some drumming logs, and that's Rough Grouse Society's got a whole kit for like these little 10-acre cycling around and every 10 years, and you can just go on forever managing and maintaining this habitat, which includes carbon because we're all carbon-based life forms. There's carbon in trees, there's carbon in us, but it's not because of the carbon. It's because of the tree species that were there, or the seeds that were buried, or the seeds that are blowing in, and the cutting or other disturbance that happens to reset whatever's there, right? So that's actually what most of the logging and forestry operations are intending to at least be guided by. What would happen if how do you get those raspberries? How does that happen in nature? Blowdowns and all, whatever. Trying to mimic natural process. That's what it's all based on.
Could you burn it and get the same results?
You can, and in fact, prescribed fire is as old as the native peoples of New England. It's well established that they used fire to manage forests and particularly for game purposes and others. And even to today, we have on state lands a small account of prescribed burns that get done to regenerate blueberry habitat or pitch pine habitats, for example. And that's done even more at bigger scale out west and in the southeast. And then there's a whole fuels management component there's controlled burns or prescribed fire for ecological or forestry purposes. There's also fire prevention use of it to burn down fuels before they build up too much, right? So there's a lot of prescribed fire. It goes all the way back in our history here on this landscape, and it's a smaller and smaller piece of the toolkit right now out there.
Go ahead.
A really technical, important technical point here is that they're ruffed grouse when you shoot them on the wing, and they're partridge when you shoot them on the ground.
So I'm more familiar with partridge.
So touching on the carbon thing, these carbon offset companies.
Yeah.
I don't know much about it.
Well, you're in a big group because most people don't. And yet here it comes, and it's everywhere, and it's having real implications.
Tell us a little bit about what these companies are, like what...
All right. Can I just start with a little carbon 101? Nobody's you don't have to go to sleep. It won't be a quiz, but I think it's helpful to just start with, we're talking about this carbon market stuff, offset projects and all that, carbon credits. It's all about coming from climate change based on carbon dioxide, one form of carbon in the atmosphere at levels that are unnaturally high and increasing at unnaturally high rates. That's what it's about, is carbon dioxide, which is one form of carbon, which is the third or fourth most abundant element in our universe. And there's been the same amount of carbon in our universe since the beginning of the universe. They're not making more of it. They're not making less of it. It's not going away. It just moves in different pools and cycles around. So it's largely in the atmosphere. It's in the soil. It's in trees and other wood. All life forms have. So it's a deer, a pine tree, or you have carbon in you, right? And when I shoot the deer, hopefully, and I eat the deer, then that carbon becomes part of me. And except that which I off gas, right? Breathing out. So carbon is carbon. It's just it's important. It's necessary for all life. All life forms are in part carbon, and there's no more or less of it. It's about where is it. And we have the issue with our atmosphere is that principally through the industrial age, we ramped up our use of dead dinosaurs, pulling them out of deep in the ground as fossil fuels and burning them and they're heavy, they're hydrocarbons, they're heavy to carbon, and converting that carbon into a gas into the atmosphere by burning it. And doing that over decades, we've just artificially increased the rate of CO2 accumulation in the atmosphere to the point where there's this feedback on climate systems. That's all background. And because of the point is too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, this is where you get to carbon offsets is you get carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, lots of things, all kinds of industrial processing and transportation. And so manufacturers who have limits or trying to limit their pollution, their carbon dioxide pollution into the atmosphere, they can get credit for buying what's known as an offset is given that forests take CO2 out of the atmosphere and you can sort of measure it. The whole concept here is that certain businesses are getting credit for buying and supporting this forest land growth. And they can use that credit to offset their emissions.
Huge companies, right?
Huge.
Major money companies are buying these grounds.
Well, they're buying, so that's a whole other piece of it, yes. But it's just, in concept, it's usually the marketplace it's just like a stock, and there's a marketplace for these credits for carbon emissions, basically a ton of carbon. Which think about that it's like, I don't know, your garden variety vehicle driving 2,500 miles. That's probably going to put off about a ton of carbon, and so a company that's just the unit of trade is a ton of carbon, and you can basically, I'm a little cynical, to be honest with you, and jumping ahead. But it's basically the concern for me is that we're allowing them to just continue polluting and putting carbon into the atmosphere because they're paying forest land in the Northeast to do that job, and that raises questions about wasn't it going to happen anyway? So that's this idea of additionality. You need to have, for this to be legitimate, there needs to be an additional benefit to the atmosphere. What does the atmosphere see? Not the company's bottom line or the person's woodlot. Okay? So, and then there's also this idea of leakage, which these are just terms that you'll hear that are challenges in this marketplace, because you got paid for taking credit for the work we're doing on the landscape in Vermont, out in California somewhere, but we're going to do it anyway. So how is that additional? And if I do stop, because of the protocols, the rules for this being in this marketplace and getting paid for my carbon that my forest is accumulating, I have to I'm going to delay harvesting. We call it extended rotation. I'm going to probably leave more trees. I'm going to cut less. So it tweaks forest management. It allows it. The people will be quick to tell, oh, no, it's allowed. But it is a change which tends to keep more carbon in the woods than out of the woods. But if I stop harvesting on my land and we all keep using wood the same amount, that's just going to be harvested somewhere else. So the atmosphere is not seeing a net change. Anyway, right? This is making some sense. This is the idea of getting paid for what your forest does in scrubbing carbon. So you have big companies now buying land and say industrial lands, and the big case would be the Connecticut Headwaters Forest in Pittsburgh's stewardship in Clarksville, New Hampshire.
How big?
146,000 acres.
In Pittsburgh.
And Pittsburgh, Clarksville, it's Stewartstown. But whereas that had always been operated for pulp and timber, managed by foresters for largely paper company ownerships, 20-something years ago, it was sold and under a conservation easement to keep it from being developed. That's held by the state of New Hampshire. And it went into another timberland investment group that continued to manage the forest. The newest owner has said, we're going to cut that harvesting by half. We're going to reduce the harvesting by half, and we're going to make money by selling these carbon offsets into this kind of marketplace that I was telling you about.
But to me, it seems like this imaginary thing, right? To me, it's like a Bitcoin thing.
It's very hard. You're not alone, Joey.
If it works well. And this is describing, in my mind, this is describing the ideal situation, which, may not be what's actually happening. But if it works well, to me, it's kind of like a conservation easement. If you own a piece of property, you can sell a lot of things from that piece of property. You can sell an easement for somebody to drive across it when they want, or you can sell the development rights, or you can sell the underlying property, or you can sell mineral rights. To me, if it works well, it would be like another one of those values that you could sell from the property. the value of it as its ability to uptake carbon. And it could be legitimate, it could be helpful in offsetting carbon.
No doubt.
If done right and if it worked well, and if there was an accounting system for it that was honest and transparent and actually did something, as Mike said, that wasn't going to happen otherwise. One of the problems with it is it's quite new. Yes. Compared with those other things. Those other things have all been around for hundreds of years. People have figured out how to do them, make them legally binding, make them work, create markets for them. This is pretty new, and so it has not had that benefit of those years of making it, trustworthy, for want of a better word.
And it's a little, a ton of carbon. You make this great point, Lewis. Like, we've figured out some of these other things. So when I mention a cord of wood, everybody knows kind of what I'm talking about. You mention a ton of carbon, and we're not really carbon. What is that? Let alone a ton of it. So it's new, yes, and it is, Joey, kind of mysterious, complicated, and seems goofy.
How new is it? Within the last 10 years, new, right?
Well, yeah, and probably in practice, it's probably fair. I think there have been people on this, it's probably at least twice that in thinking about it in concept. And this isn't the part of a larger idea of I'm for private landowners getting paid for the services their land provides, right? Like clean water, clean air. We just have to figure out these mechanisms, systems, and this is a free market attempt to figure it out to some extent. And so I want to be clear. I think Lewis makes a great point. It can be like all those other things, but it is new, as he says, and it is wicked complicated and hard to talk about. It's hard to make sense of it, and it's not intuitive. And it does smell an awful lot like a shell game, and who's getting what? And there's so many holes in it, and you can Google it. I mean, there's a lot of controversy about this. That said, there are people making real money by doing nothing more than owning their forest land and measuring its growth and getting credit for the amount of carbon that's taken out or kept out of the atmosphere by that growth.
Billion-dollar company now is what they're saying. It started out in the millions, and it's doubling.
I don't know
every
this particular. I know
but where's the money come from?
These companies that pay to buy a credit that they can use to offset their own emissions.
So there's people getting rich out there off of this.
I think the companies are being allowed, at its best, they're being sped along towards their goals of reducing their climate impact. At their worst, it's a total greenwashing shell game, and they're saving money because they have to spend. But they wouldn't be spending this money to buy credits if it wasn't working for their business some other way. So the industries that are buying these credits, I don't know how it works for them. The project developers, these are the consultants in the middle that connect the company to a landowner according to a set of protocols. So there's a handful of organizations that establish the rules of the road. For, like Lewis was saying, how does these transactions work, and where's the rigor? And by the way, this is mostly in the voluntary marketplace. There's also
mandatory.
Yeah, regulatory marketplace that has a little bit more teeth in it. But so this is the sort of Wild West of the voluntary carbon markets. I think the people who kind of put it all together and draw up the agreements and what are the terms, they're making some serious coin. Yeah. And landowners are starting to get paid, a few bucks per acre per year, maybe more, maybe even up to a few $100s. And that's new, and that's interesting. I own woodland, and I pay taxes. And every now and then when I cut timber, I make a little money. But it'd be kind of nice to know I could get paid just because they're cleaning the atmosphere. Yeah, I'm for that. It's just, what are the rules? Who's counting and who's getting rich? Yeah. It ain't the landowners at this point.
It's allowed in 11 states right now? It's legal in 11 states or something?
Boy, I don't know.
It's pretty much just the East Coast, like from Virginia, West Virginia.
Well, there's different programs that focus in different areas. I do know that. I'm sorry, I can't say for sure.
Maine.
What I want to know is what happens to the carbon cycle, Mike, when you shoot a tree because the deer's too close.
Well, there's really little change, and the tree will overcome that injury, depending on where you hit it.
And the deer will definitely recover.
Well, that's what I mean. There's little change. The deer's already down range.
He's running. So let's talk deer hunting. Where do you see this state headed?
So I'll probably get a lot of emails from your listeners when I say this. I think Vermont's about to go into the golden age of deer hunting.
Really?
Yep. And the reason for that, well, there's a lot of reasons for it, in my opinion, but two of the reasons I really don't like, but I think they will have an effect. One is climate change and easier winters. I think we're going to see a pretty dramatic change in deer survival through the winters. Over the course of the next few years. And the other is declining hunter numbers. Those are two things I hate, two things I would do everything I could do to prevent. But I think those two things, combined with some smaller factors, will mean that we'll have better, more accessible, and more successful deer hunting in Vermont than we've had maybe ever, but certainly in a long time.
It seems to me like certain parts of the state, I would say I think you're on to something. There's certain parts of the state that are producing very good deer, and there's certain parts of the state that used to produce very good deer that do not produce the same kind of quality as they used to.
So I'll see if I can dig it up and send it to you, but and your listeners can look it up in the Fish and Wildlife archives. But it's fascinating if you look at a map of the state of Vermont and where deer were shot in the 1970s and where they're shot now, and they're almost mirror images of each other.
Really?
Yeah, the places where all the deer were taken in the 70s are very few deer taken now, and the places where there were no deer in the 70s are where all the deer by numbers are taken now. Now you still have mountain areas in the Northeast Kingdom where a lot of big deer are taken, but few numbers.
Yeah.
But places like the Champlain Valley, places like Franklin County, those were very few deer taken in those places in the 70s and in a lot of those parts of the state, and now there are large numbers of deer taken there, and it's just a function of the habitat changing and farmland changing where it is, forest changing where they are, and also hunter pressure where people are deer hunting, but they're almost mirror images of each other, and I think a lot of that is why people are frustrated, understandably so. We used to have you had a camp that you have had for many generations, many decades in your family. There might have been many deer shot out of it in the 70s and very few shot now. But the corollary is also true. Those places that didn't have many deer taken many years ago have a lot taken now. It's a little hard to compare because we have so many more seasons now and so much longer seasons now. So, I always used to have this fight with a outdoor journalist that I really like, but we always had this argument because you compare just the rifle bucks taken now versus 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, whatever. But you can't just compare those rifle bucks to rifle bucks now. Now we have long archery seasons, we have muzzleloader seasons, we have all these different opportunities. So you've got to take the aggregate, look at them in the aggregate. And I think. I had very mixed feelings. The 3-point rule was passed before I came into the department. Quite a while, several years before I came into the department. I have very mixed feelings about that rule for reasons I can go into if it's interesting. But I think it did have an impact on the quality of bucks taken in Vermont. And
having that 3-point.
Yeah. And when I was in Rodney Elmer's taxidermy shop one time, and he was like, well, here are the deer from before and here are the deer after. And I think that the 1 buck rule will have maybe as close to as significant an impact as that 3-point rule. So I think all of those are smaller factors, but I think they'll contribute to the what I see coming. But I think deer hunting is going to be better and more successful, more variety in terms of opportunity, types of hunting, places people can hunt. I think we're going into the golden age. I know that's not
the right direction.
Not a common viewpoint, but
Maybe I missed this. Sorry. And I'll push a little bit here back. Posting?
yeah. Posting,
You say increased access, isn't it going the other direction?
well, I mean, when I say increased access, I mean length of seasons. Yeah, land access is a huge problem, and posting is certainly a major part of that. Okay. Yeah, no, when I mean access, I mean length of seasons, variety of types of seasons.
Yeah.
The accessibility might be an issue, but where you have posted land and nobody's going to let you on there is also going to grow an age structure.
Yeah.
Well, that's true, and I, frankly, I gotta say that hunters are a major impediment to the Fish and Wildlife Department's efforts against posting, because everybody who has their own piece of property or a friend's piece of property that they post, they want to keep it posted, and I understand why, but hunters are great advocates against posting, but they're also advocates for posting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mike, what do you make of that from a forestry standpoint? Saying that we're headed in the right direction of deer hunting, what do you see forestry-wise? Do you see the forest coming along for the better or for the worst?
Well, we're generally speaking, the landscape heavily forested, generally doing pretty well. Yeah, like that's a really good story and better than most states. We're the third, fourth most forested state, and it's generally doing well. There's two things I would call your attention to. Well, three. One is the culture that's collapsing that supports it. We already covered that. The second one would be we're losing forest land, acres, okay, for the first time in 100 years, kind of going the other way. There's always been woods coming out for agriculture, woods coming out for houses, but for whatever the balance of woods, farms going back into woods and whatever, right now it's documented. That people argue about the number, but it seems people agree between 8,000, 15,000 acres a year of forest land in Vermont going away. Not logging. I'm talking about it's no longer a forest. So that's a problem if it continues that way, right? We're just losing land. And depending on where and which land and for access and for ecological connectivity, there's a lot of questions there. But losing land is one threat to the golden future. The other piece is what we've touched on is that we largely have, owing to the land use history and agriculture and then abandonment of farms at certain periods and regrowth of forest, we have, largely speaking, generally speaking across the state, a pretty homogeneous, a pretty simple and uniform forest condition. They're largely 80-something years old, 80 to 120 years old. For me, that'll be a good run. That's barely middle age for most of the northern hardwood species and the associated softwoods that grow with them, right? So it's a really young forest still. It's not early successional rabbit and grouse habitat, but it's I'd call it late adolescent. It's not even middle aged in my view.
Really?
Yes, and because not only is it age, but there's a mix of species that's pretty simplified. And the structure, which is the three-dimensionality of the forest. Think about the sizes, the spacing, and the arrangements of the trees. It's like a closed canopy, a couple of age classes up there in the canopy, and dominant and subdominant trees. Maybe a lower, some, but not much in the understory. So it's closed canopy, pretty limited understory. That's not great for songbirds or white-tailed deer for habitat, right? And so it's kind of stuck. They can hang in this, what we geeky foresters call stem exclusion stage, where the canopy's closed and it's excluding new stems from growing up without disturbance. It'll just kind of lock in there for decades. And so if that continues, I don't think it's great for deer in particular. But this is where we come back to the forestry piece, is that it's in a particularly, you could call it vulnerable, or you could call it available, or you could call it suitable. It's in a particularly suitable position right now in this category where some judicious tree cutting can really jumpstart the complexity and the structural enhancement of the forest, which is well known to being the most resilient, the most diverse, and the most productive forests are the ones that are complex. They're not one simple age class with three different species. It's a mix of young and old and different sizes. Living and dead. And so restoration forestry to kind of jumpstart, it's now being called ecological forestry. It's called climate smart forestry. All it is just sort of reasonable. And to me, it's forestry. It's what it's supposed to be, which is understanding what you have, understanding how the ecology of a place, how these organisms all work, but like desimplifying it. And I like to say recomplexifying a forest stand by making a hole in the canopy. You get new sunlight, you get ferns, you get raspberries, but you part those raspberries eventually. You know what's coming through there? Beech, sugar maple, yellow birch, on its way. So we can, and there are more and more is really exciting times for forestry and silviculture, is like how do we jumpstart these very, I call them boring, sterile, kind of simplified forests that aren't great habitat to be more productive in all these ways, including deer habitat.
You guys got your work cut out for you.
But, well, we do. No, we know how to do it. And we have some people that want us to do it. But then there's, right, it's like, who's paying for it? And who's putting up with those trucks going down the road? What neighbors are complaining? Like, so that, again, we know how to do it. We need to have the mills. We need to have the workforce. And we need a community that supports it.
Yeah, but if it doesn't happen now, it's never going to happen.
And when we lose the logging workforce and when mills shutter, they don't come back.
No, they don't come back, but those trees are just going to fall over, blow over, or whatever. They're just going to rot. And sure, you're going to have your new growth, like what you're talking about.
It'll take a really long time to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, but all the animals are dead by the time that takes place.
No, I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying we're missing an opportunity we can really accelerate the habitat conditions to Lewis's, golden future to play that side of this with all the new regulatory access and that's great to hear. And we could actually jumpstart the habitat to be more productive. We know how to do it, but we don't have the sort of political or the cultural support for it. And it's also costs money, and you need people who know how to do it and are willing to work hard.
When you say it costs money, there's so much money to be cut, though.
Yeah. I'm sorry. You're right. That. Thanks for catching that. What costs money? Well, pretty much everything. Like, so you need to be able to cut the trees and have a market to sell them into, so that you can pay the forester and the logger gets his or her share, et cetera. Like, the money makes it all work. It also, there's a lot of habitat work, enhancement work that doesn't produce, it's pre-commercial or non-commercial. So the timber sales really, particularly on public lands, a lot of that stuff, that the timber money goes into trails, goes into habitat enhancement, water quality, aquatic stuff, access. So that's all I mean by it's expensive. You're right to point out that there's economic opportunity in good forestry if you have this whole system in place.
If you don't have proponents of it now, though, do you think you'll ever have proponents of it?
I would say
the changing demographics that are coming to Vermont.
This is where we get decidedly negative in our conversation. Like, to me, I don't see any reason to see it just magically changing. I worry that the only thing that's going to change it is scarcity. When we can't get what we need, and when and that's probably not even in my lifetime. But what we're running up against is a region, a northeast region that is I'm going to go here. It's like a green elitist playground that's pretend land, and it's because it's just it's held as forest. There's a legal constraint that says it's going to stay that way, but the things that have kept it this way to this point are no longer there. And it's not really functioning anymore, other than being, pretty extensive forest land that will have all these natural things. And in time, it won't be boring middle-aged. It'll be a mixed mosaic of ages and conditions. But honestly, I look around. I mean, I worked hard at this stuff, and I don't know. Lewis used to say, it's over. And I'd say, no, it's not. Remember, I'd pound the table. It's not. I think I've kind of come around to it. He might be right.
I do think that Lewis is right in that fact. I think that it's over, unless you can...
I'm gonna throw you for a loop here by being the optimist. It's uncharacteristic for me.
Anybody seen Lewis?
I have tremendous optimism for this. Looking at the hunting and fishing world, 2021 or 2022, maybe 2020. One of those years was among the highest years of hunting licenses sold in Vermont in decades, or over a decade. I see a lot of COVID. COVID was part of it.
Okay.
But I see a lot of people who did not grow up hunting getting into it. Probably more people who never grew up hunting getting into it than was true in any time in our history as in modern times of hunting. And I think that same thing can apply to some of these other natural resource uses and values. And Mike's department, old department, did a good job of promoting this. I think other people are starting to pick up that ball and advance it. And I think that frankly, the agricultural world led the way in this and was ahead of us in terms of enlisting people who did not have a history or knowledge or background or particular interest in agriculture and getting into it through food. And I think that hunting and fishing is coming along. I think logging will come along, some of these other uses. I think people will get into it and will understand the importance of it. Maybe it won't be done like it was done 50 years ago.
It won't be.
But it will be done, and it will be done by a group of people who will come to appreciate and value it and who are not from that background. And I know I have real optimism for that. I don't have real optimism for fixing the elite playground problem that Mike mentioned. I think that's
it's here.
That's here.
It's not going away.
But within that reality, I think there's some optimism for education and encouraging people to get into these things and value them that they didn't. I've seen it in hunting, and frankly, the Fish and Wildlife Departments for many years did not do a good job of encouraging and nurturing that, and I think they're much better about it now, and are helping what it already was an organic movement. Yeah. You pointed out yourself, Steve Rinella podcast, one of the most popular podcasts in the entire country. And that is a podcast, his whole movement largely geared towards people who did not come from a hunting background. I'm sure there are plenty of people who listen to it who grew up hunting and fishing, for sure. But it is largely about this new group of people getting into it, coming to appreciate those things that they didn't necessarily grow up with.
Understanding it.
Yeah, understanding it. Wendell Berry said eating is an agricultural act. Well, it's also a conservation act, as is living in a house made out of wood or using toilet paper or any of these other things that we do that come from the woods.
Yeah. My fear, I like your optimism about it, because my fear is that it's gone by the wayside already, right? And it's only going to get worse with the people that are moving here that do not want to see a patch cut, clear cut, select cut, right? It's going to wreck their leaves, whatever they got going on there. They're not going to like it. But to me, when I walk in there, I get up on top of the ridge and I'm like, oh yeah, I had a good day here. 15 years ago, I found a dozen moose antlers here, and now there's not a moose track to be had. And I could take you up there, and the simple answer is, well, there's nothing for them to eat. They were here, they browsed themselves off, and they put themselves pretty much in extinction around here.
Well, this is something actually I'd like to talk about, which is too many deer. I know that'll hit a real high note for your listeners, but deer's biggest enemy is deer, and their ability to destroy their own habitat is maybe unrivaled certainly among the game species, and I think that's the opposite side of these changes that we're seeing. Is deer are actually a species that do very well with living near people, and so. I think one of the important things is, as much as I love hunting big woods and being out there far away from everything, I think we're going to have to acknowledge that where these species live is changing, and where we're going to hunt them is changing. And, I think that's probably just as important as the educating ourselves is probably just about that. It's probably just as important as educating people who didn't grow up doing this stuff.
Yeah. Overpopulation of them.
Yep.
I would say we're on the brink right now of being overpopulated for what we got.
It depends entirely on where you are. It's like that deer harvest map. It depends entirely on where you are. There are places where we could use many times the number of deer we have now. There are places where we're overpopulating and they're damaging habitat now. So it really depends a lot. And the amazing thing, as you know, I'm not a deer biologist, but the amazing thing is how fast it can happen. It only takes a few years.
All it takes is, a few years or one hard winter, right? And when you got too many deer in a deer yard and they browse that thing off to a point where the following year we have a very hard winter and there's no browse for them, they're done.
Yep.
It's
real.
Doe permits. Rumor has it that, like our Northeast Kingdom, E1, E2, it's going to get some doe permits. There's too many deer. What do you think about that?
Well, I took a few slings and arrows for supporting the biologists in bringing back archery hunting up there, including for does. The reason was simple. It was just a question of providing opportunity, and the number harvested is small enough that it doesn't really make any difference. I'm not sure about what the biologists in the department are thinking currently about doe permits up there, but harvested does is how you manage deer populations, and pretty much exclusively how you manage them. And so whether that's with a muzzleloader or a crossbow, that's how you do it, and that's how you got to do it. And so I think the department biologists have a long history of being pretty brave about putting doe permits numbers out there. And I think over the long term, their approach to that has been borne out and been supported, and I think hunters are coming to support that too. But there was a lot of years where the anti-hunters were not what biologists in the department were made uncomfortable by. It was the hunters who didn't want doe permits.
Yeah. There's a lot of that older generation that does not want it. They had seen the effects of it through their time, though, right? Because there was a doe season during rifle back when, and it kind of, I don't want to say cleaned them out, but it definitely put a toll on, took a toll on the herd.
Yeah, I think there was a combination of things. Permits, or seasons, but also winter weather. I did a combination of those things. But I think you're right. I think I don't think you'll ever see rifle doe permits in Vermont for that reason.
Yeah.
And for another, maybe more practical reason, which is most of the places where we have the biggest issue with deer populations are generally not in places where it's easy or even safe to use a rifle. So a rifle is probably not the best implement to manage doe populations. Places could be done, but
You're 100% right.
But it's just not. They're in backyards and suburban areas and little patches of woods between houses. And
you could go up the road here and see 20 a night. You know what I mean? In one field, and you can't get in there to shoot them with a rifle. Yep. Nor would you want to.
Yep.
May I ask Lewis a question on this?
Let drive.
Well, you won't be surprised. I've always wondered this. Hunting in Vermont and New Hampshire, it's where does are concerned in Vermont. If it's muzzleloader, say it's a lottery, so that some people, a fraction of the people, get a tag for the entire season. Whereas in New Hampshire, sometimes the way they do the antlerless is everybody gets a day or two of any deer, right? So I'm just curious, you were in that world. Can you explain why there's that's a big difference, and do you think one's better than the other in how you go about allocating doe permits?
Yeah, I think that from a biological standpoint, you could probably do either. You could vary the length of which anybody could take and make the same
the numbers
impact.
that you're getting at.
Yep. I think it's about the hunters, not about the deer, and just the rodeo aspect of having that out there for such a short period of time. Same reason that Vermont doesn't stock pheasants anymore.
Just too much. We couldn't handle it.
Well, maybe at current deer hunter numbers, but at the hunter numbers that used to be in Vermont, I think that would be
okay. That actually is helpful.
What do you mean? Just clean them out?
Well, more danger to other hunters, or
I'll
just
tell you,
a rodeo atmosphere. Let's just call it a rodeo atmosphere.
There's a place across the river. I'm not going to name names.
Brown is down, right? That's
where
what you mean?
it is.
Yeah.
They stock pheasants on the other side of the river. And that place, let's say they drop them on a Thursday, that place 45 minutes before that truck is supposed to show is such a rodeo. It's a freaking shit show. There's got to be lead flying everywhere. People got to be getting
keep your head down.
Hayfield, 3/4 of a mile from my house. Vermont Fish and Wildlife used to stock pheasants there, and apparently it was the same thing.
Keep your head down.
Yeah. Well, here's what I have to say on the subject of doe tags. I'm for them. I shot 2 female deer last year, one with a muzzleloader, one with a bow, and they are good eating. I am quite good with it.
Yeah.
And I'm grateful for the chance I had because I went buckless.
There's too many of them. I just had this conversation with one of my guys. He's like, should I put in for an antlers tag this year? And I was like, 100% you should put in for an antlers tag. There's way too many doe on the landscape.
I won't speak for the Fish and Wildlife Department, which I no longer work at, but just for my own reasons for supporting one buck. A big part of the reason that I thought it was the right decision, and to be clear, it was a decision made by biologists, not by me, but a big part of the reason I supported it was to push people towards doe harvest.
You want meat? Why not? It's the best eating meat there is.
It's unbelievable.
And you can hunt bucks. You have one buck tag. You can hunt bucks, but if you want it just to put a couple deer in the freezer, there you go.
Yeah. So let me ask you something. APRs, antler point restrictions. You were in favor of having that.
Well, I'm very mixed. I could say this now that I don't work in the department. I'm a very mixed minds about APRs. It existed before I went in as commissioner, and I supported keeping it. because it was already in place. But I'm a very mixed mind about it, and I tell you, there's a couple of reasons. The most important of which, from my perspective, is what I love about Vermont deer hunting is the culture of Vermont deer hunting and what it's about. And to me, it's about being in the woods, seeing things you don't see unless you're deer hunting, being quiet, being with friends and family, going to camp, putting meat in the freezer. All of those things are the reasons I love Vermont deer hunting culture.
Weighing your buck.
We weigh in our bucks, exactly. And to me, APRs run contrary to that because it's about age structure and bigger deer. Having said that, what I really want for deer hunting in Vermont is for everybody to be able to do what they love and care about. So have places where people can hunt and there are big bucks, if that's what you're into. Have places where you can harvest meat. Have places where you go to camp. Have places where you go out your backyard after you get done work. What I love about our current set of regulations and where I think we're going as a state is as much opportunity and access to hunting as people can get. And so APR is part of that.
I wish we had more opportunity, right? Like I wish, to me, I'm like, shit, just adopt New Hampshire's rules, right? That opportunity of being able, like you say, Mike, shoot a doe if you want a doe. If you want meat, shoot. There's your one tag for a gun. One with a gun and you're done. Whether it's buck or doe. I like that opportunity of that early season bow hunting that they provide, right? September 15th, bucks are patternable, right? The guy that wants to focus on shooting a bigger buck, there's no better time to shoot that buck than when he's in that summer pattern. He's just coming out of velvet, right? He's still doing his summer things. His demeanor is down. He's fun time of year to hunt,
I hear you, but with modern muzzleloaders and with crossbows, people have opportunity to harvest.
Oh, they do. For sure. I mean, some seasons don't apply to them, but
To your point,
different story for another day.
to your point, Joey, I think one of the nicest bucks I've seen in recent memory was during the very recently begun early muzzleloader, where it's antlerless only. Of course, that's when I saw that. It's early. It's late October, so we're still relatively early. And you're just like, this is what I see when I have a doe tag and can only shoot an antlerless deer.
Yeah. I don't know. I do like the way that New Hampshire does it just because it seems like it spreads it out, takes pressure off that certain window, 2-week window, 16 days, whatever it is of rifle season, and it spreads it right out. And then the archery hunters have their time. And I guess for me in a place like this town, right? Like when you make noise pushing woods for doe tags, right? Guys push woods, muzzleloaders, they're driving small patches of woods. It pisses people off. Nothing pisses people off more than having somebody on your back lawn pushing deer, trying to kill the doe. Archers, it's quiet. Everybody's got permission. You drag the deer out during the dark. It's a very useful management tool. I would love to see that September 15th come to Vermont. Maybe it's just shooting does, managing does.
Yeah. I hear you. I agree. And I'll raise you one. On the other end, in New Hampshire, you can carry your bow during rifle season. Mm-hmm. And, campmate, my buddy Matt, he's made good on that, which is awesome. I haven't, but I like the idea of, it's his story to tell, but the gist of it is he saw a doe. He carries his bow going through the woods in his hands, and he's got a small rifle on a scabbard on his back. Nice. And he sees a doe, and he pulls up and draws, and he lets fly, and the arrow hits something, whatever he missed, and the doe jumped a little bit and ran, and he looked, and there was a beautiful buck standing there. Just kidding. And so he pulled that little rifle off his back, and pow.
No kidding.
Yep.
Huh.
We can't do that.
We can't all be Matt.
No, we can't all be Matt.
For us.
So APRs, did the department ever think about doing something within certain zones of like up in the ante on the 3-point per side? Like I look at the islands, for instance. Mm-hmm. Why not do like a 6-point minimum, or 4 to a side in a place like that where it can be managed, where there's no winter severity to speak of. Most everything's private land, posted ground.
So there's always a lot of requests for different things. I'm sure that's been one of the things that's in the mix. The problem I would have with that is that you're limiting what people who live there and want to hunt near where they live can do, right? You're impacting their hunting, leaving the regs the same other places. Now, we do the same thing with muzzleloader, so it's not the end of the world to do that. But my problem with APRs, it wouldn't be a concern in the islands, obviously, but my problem with APRs is you put such a limitation on tracking, people who want to still hunt or track, because how often are you going to get it that much chance to tell the difference between a five and a 4, when you're hunting that way? So it puts a real limitation on those types of hunting, and I think I know you'll end up with more deer that get taken by the game wardens, because people will do the right thing, they'll make a mistake, and they'll self-report.
Yep.
That's not the end of the world. That meat goes to good use. It goes to food pantries. Several of the wardens get together and cut up deer like that and deliver them to food shelves, so it's not like it's going to waste. But you have a lot more of that. So I think those are the arguments against it, in addition to that cultural argument that I made earlier. Maybe someday they might go that direction, but I think those are the arguments. I think it's fair to say that's why it hasn't happened yet.
Yep. Yeah, you see, I think it's D1 that is it's D1 you can shoot spike horns, right? I think it's the entire zone you can shoot spike horns. It's
it's generally the kingdom and the spine of the Green Mountains.
Yep, and in recent data that Vermont Big Game Club had released out, there's very few scoreable bucks coming from that whole area of D1, and I think it's purely based on the fact that everyone hunts. It's still rural Vermont, right? And those bucks, when they're legal, they're dead.
I would bet that it's winners.
Think so?
They just don't live long enough.
But you take an area like Holland and Derby and Newport City, there's so much cedar within that farm ground, a lot of posted land. There's so much cedar in there. It's like a deer mecca, right? They have some of the most deer per square mile in that country than anywhere else in the state. I think it's 4.5, 5 deer per square mile. But they cannot grow an age structure to save their life. I mean, there's a couple nice buck that come through the cracks, come over the border, right? Usually come over the border. The other side, when you go over that border,
Farms in Quebec.
Yeah. When you go over the other side of that border, night and day difference. It's like a little Midwest.
Yeah, but look at how different the landscape is up there.
Yeah. I mean, flat
farm fields, huge farm fields, hedgerows. I mean, it looks like the Midwest except colder.
Yep.
It's just a completely different landscape.
Heated blinds.
Heated blinds. Yeah, I always like that. I always like that idea.
Stands. Mike, question for you, deer hunt related. Oaks is our environment changing, warming up to a point where oaks are coming further and further north. I see them popping up in places that I've never seen them before. I mean, obviously it takes time to grow them, but it seems like with the warmer conditions that we're having, warmer winters, there's a stage there that they grow, right? That you have tiers, 1 through 5 or something. It seems like we're starting to...
Like the hardiness zones?
Yes.
Yeah, it's very much related, and you're right. So this idea of climate-induced shifts in species, generally northward. And so your cedar, which is at the southern end of its range, is going to moving out, and your oaks and maybe hickories from the south will start to be more prevalent. My understanding is this takes some decades. Trees don't get up and run. But birds, blue jays moving acorns is kind of famous, and it's more suitable now if they get dropped. So anyway, it's a slow thing, but yes, I think we are seeing. I share the same. I've been like, wow, that's oak. I can't believe I'm seeing oak seedlings here. Got to have something to have put the seed there. That's why I mentioned the blue jays or whatever. But they're gradually moving northward, and we're seeing a shift of species migration that's generalized as northward. So at mid-Appalachian species, there's models that predict that's what Vermont's going to look like. Look to North Carolina. That's what we're going to look like in 50, 100 years. Personally / professionally, I think it's going to take a little longer. But we are already seeing what you're seeing. What you note is like so. So oak is a more southern species. It competes better with more in generally warmer climates, wetter, and so it stands to reason that we're going to see more of those southern species. You'll see less cedar, less balsam fir.
More southerners, more flatlanders.
Chasing their trees up here.
Yeah, it's too bad you can't, for every flatlander that comes to this town, you can't bring an oak tree with it.
Yeah. There's an oak seedling 100 yards behind my house. I think it's the only one on my property. And every time I go by it, I think, wow, I don't know. I hate the fact that they're moving in and replacing the sugar maples. On the other hand, the mast is good. So,
Yeah.
Question: signpost trees, brown ash trees.
I get very excited by these.
I know you do. Why do they not grow in more central and southern areas?
I'm
not saying they don't. They're just very hard to come by, right? Like, so a lot of our listeners are, I've never found a signpost tree around here, right? Like, why is that?
Those particular ones, those ash, black, brown ash, they're really specific to certain site conditions: moisture, pH of the soil, the chemistry of the soil. A beech tree, we call it a broad ecological amplitude. It's got it can grow and compete. And that's the key: compete and survive in a wide range of conditions, and tolerate shade and kind of persist and hang on. Others are more picky. So this is just a super picky species where, in terms of where it can grow and be successful relative to its competitors. Remember, people say, it likes to grow here. Any tree, any plant would like to grow in highly fertile, well-drained, but moist soil. That's what they want. They like that. But a sugar maple a white ash is going to outcompete almost everything else on those really good soils because it's just good at that. A white pine people say, it likes sandy soils. You see it there because it competes, it tolerates it better than other species. It would prefer to be in a rich, moist loam, but it's in that sandy soil because it can outcompete the others. And so this is just a basic kind of concept behind which trees grow where. They all will grow where they can, and they'll all do really well in nice soils. Some do better than others in nice soils, and some, on the other hand, can outcompete on sand because they just put up with it. And then these signposts on these particular, they're kind of wetland species, these ash you're talking about, where you see them, they generally have some hydric, watery kind of places. I just would put it that way. They're more picky, and so they can compete there, but they can't compete up the slope on that rocky talus where all that yellow birch and sugar maples going bonkers. They get outcompeted there. So they're restricted. They're just picky. I think the easiest way to think of it is in terms of where they can grow and make a living.
So it has some to do with climate.
Yes, they're not going to grow. So our climate here generally is it's really good for trees, but not all trees. And as climate changes, I don't know that I could say, how is the general pattern that we're seeing with climate change affecting brown ash? I don't know, but I'm guessing it might even be good for it. Warmer. It's hard. We're going to see how this all shakes out. But it comes down to each tree species is a species because it has unique characteristics, and those make it suitable or less suitable to thrive and outmuscle somebody else nearby. And those guys they're just really restricted in where they can grow, the site conditions.
Yeah, for instance, I could show you 150, 200 signpost trees in northern Vermont, but when I come here, which I've put a boot print on every acre in this town. And there's not a brown ash signpostry in this town. I could show you maples, right?
Yeah.
But not brown ash. I always wondered why
You're
that.
challenging me now, Joey, because I don't know if I've walked the same acres with the same boot stride. But anyway, I've been around, and I think now I'm like, haven't I seen? I know. I'm going to go look for one that I think I might have seen. It's the species, but not a signpost.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah,
It's
you make a
interesting.
great point. They're not everywhere.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Huh. What else you guys want to add?
Okay, well, you've asked enough questions.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
Not that I have not been enjoying sitting over here listening, and you've answered or asked some questions that I've been wanting to ask, but I want to move to a bigger species of game and ask you guys your opinion on the bear population and what your take is on why bears are becoming so brazen in rural areas. We have, obviously they're opportunists. They get into dumpsters. We have this every year. We're notifying the public, get rid of your bird feeders, close your dumpsters. But now we're seeing an uptick of bears that are entering people's cars. They're literally opening doors. They're getting in cars. They're searching for food. So I want to get your take on, wildlife versus forestry. Is it a lack of food in the forest? Is it a lack of habitat? Is it, just that they're being pushed into towns because of construction? And, what is it? I want to know your opinion.
All of those things. So again, I got to say, I'm not a bear biologist or any other kind, but I've talked to a lot of them, and it's all of those things. It's every one of those things you just mentioned. The bear population is up. The amount of feed for them in the forest is down because of the maturity of the forest. The people's construction, people building homes and other things have gone more into their habitat, fragmented it, means that people are closer to them. Mandatory composting rule probably has something to play here. I support that law. I don't think it's a good idea for us to be throwing food in the landfill when we can compost it. But you have a lot of people in the state who did not know how to compost and hadn't been doing it for a long time, suddenly start doing it. So I think it's all of those things. I happened to work at Fish and Wildlife during a period of pretty radical change in a whole lot of things, and some of those things were really good and some of them were really bad. One of the bad ones was the bear biologists used to always joke, well, Vermont's immune to bear problems. Like, we have no bear problems. This is so strange. Everybody else has bear problems. And it was while I was commissioner that changed, and it changed fast, and it changed radically. And, when Mike was at FPR and I was at Fish and Wildlife, was the first time, I think, that the state park started putting bear-proof dumpsters out because it was the first time they had to.
Yeah, we were there the same. I was just going to go there. It's like that's a great example of like suddenly in the parks, it's just what you described. I mean, out of control, and we're kind of coming to the biologists and the wardens. Well, we need some help here, and what do we do? And well, one thing you could do would be lock up your darn trash. So yeah, it really came on quick, didn't it? I don't have anything to add to that other than I would maybe guess that bears they're super smart and well adapted, and they know what they need, and what they need, they're finding it a lot easier, in the parking lot in the dumpster than in the woods.
Can I give you my simple answer as to what would fix that problem?
Sure.
A 50-gallon drum of donuts September 1st with a hunter looking over it.
I think that would actually make it worse.
Yeah.
You don't think we'd clean them out?
Nope. I think it would actually make them worse. And that's one of the reasons that bear baiting is not allowed, not legal in Vermont. I think it would actually habituate them to humans more.
Really?
Yeah. And I've had the very same argument for a long time with people, and maybe I'm wrong, because there's certainly some very smart people who make that argument. But I think it would habituate them more to people. I think that New Hampshire makes a mistake by keeping that.
Yeah.
Why do you
On
think?
the other hand, I think getting rid of bear hounds would be a huge mistake also.
Correct. Yeah.
Because I think they play a very important role in scaring bears, making bears aware of and scared of people again. Now, some people who are also smart will say that I don't know what I'm talking about there either. But I have seen it work. I've seen
bear problems fixed that way.
You saw just recently where they captured that bear in Enosburg, which was that container, I guess, was donated by the Vermont Bear Hound Association, and that bear had a milk jug around his head, and they all worked together and they got the bear and took the jug off, cut the jug off, and released him.
The wardens and biologists depend on the bear houndsman quite a bit for a bunch of things, including that.
So the question remains. I mean, you said it happened fast and you were there, but like, do you have any? Like you said, I hadn't thought of that. It's like it was a problem in the Smokies, you know, and it's everywhere. And we didn't.
It was a problem in Maine.
What changed? I guess so. You're saying all those things changed.
I think all of those things. I think the bear population is
growing.
It's not going like this, but it's increasing. And
fascinating.
There's a lot of people. I think also, frankly, I think the cultural stuff we've talked about is also, I think, a big reason. I think people don't shoot bears and be quiet about it. I think there used to maybe be more of that happening, which, you know, I don't think is a good thing. But I think more of that used to happen. I think social media plays a big role. You know, every time there's a bear incident of any importance at all, it comes across my Facebook feed because of who I'm friends with and who I follow. That could be in Newport or it could be in Bennington. You know, 20 years ago, that would not have been true. I would have only heard about the ones that happened around me. So I think that plays a role.
So I came onto the board just before you left, and part of the only reason why I'm here today is just to have some words with you after this podcast about the fact that I was considered for the board, and you talked me into it and said, "Oh, it'll be great. It'll be really great." And then you took off.
And hasn't it been great?
Awesome. Go for it. Get him.
One of my last acts.
So, I'm just kidding. But it definitely has its ups and downs. But, you know, ever since I came on the board, I am getting a fair amount of inquiries from people that want to bring back a spring bear hunt.
There is a bear problem. Like, certain pockets of Vermont have a serious bear problem. Stowe is one of them. I just saw a bear, which was the 11th bear that I've seen this spring, come out of Bingham Falls parking lot. There's people 30 feet away, crosses the road, not running, right in front of cars. Cars stop, and you know where it's headed? It's headed over to Mountain Glen to those dumpsters. That's where it's headed. It knows it can get food there, right? And this is just my opinion. I know I'm sitting with a forester, okay? We have this old growth forest with nothing for these bears to chew on right now, right? So where is the source that they come to get feed? They come to the towns, they come to the fields, they're after grass, they're after people's garbage. When that kind of slows up a little bit, right? When the fruit starts dropping and the nuts start hitting the floor up there, they're gone. The bear incidents stop and they're headed back up the ridges, right? We see it. We get 3 inches of snow on the ground the first week of deer season. There's fucking bear tracks everywhere on Worcester, right?
Yeah.
So taking all of this into account, you know, you have the bears that are migrating more toward town, and you have a group of people who don't want bears hunted at all. And, you know, where do we go from here to mitigate that problem? Because, you know, they're not being hunted as much, and people don't want, well, a certain group of people don't want young bears to be shot. They don't want sows with cubs to be shot, which, you know, it's all a matter of, you know, ethics and whatnot. It's a very long conversation. But
any animal in its youth, some of them get shot. It just is what it is. And you can't take that experience away from a hunter. If a hunter wants to shoot a fawn, let them shoot a fawn, right? As long as the hunt is there and they're going to eat it. So
you know what? How I look at that is, I mean, how many people order veal in a restaurant? I mean, you're eating a baby calf, and nobody's taking into consideration that that's a baby. So, you know, you have some people, I can argue, that they don't want fawns or, you know, young bears to be shot, but then you're eating veal. So, you know, it's all relative when you think about it. But, you know, just like, how do we mitigate this problem? If it's a lack of food in the forest, how do we get them back to the forest? How do we get them out of the town? How do we because, you know, what ends up happening is that these bears are getting hit by cars. So they're instead of being hunted, which is a more humane way of maintaining the population, they're getting hit by cars and they're suffering. and
Or they're running around with one leg.
or they're running around,
Right,
or they're
up
being
here,
euthanized
the
by
one up here.
wardens because they're attacking people, dogs, whatever the problem. So, it's. I'm a solutions person. Like if there's a problem, I want to find a solution. And it just seems like this has been a recurring problem for a long time. And I'm not seeing solutions taking place. So
There was 14 bears, correct, killed in this town last year?
14, yes.
And I guarantee you, from just what I know from living in this town and knowing the people that I know, I bet you there was double that number that were shot by residents that were sick of the issue because of it.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say, I think you're onto something here, and I would say everything we've talked about today is part of the solution you're seeking. It's kind of all of this. It's the culture of both forestry and hunting that's changing so much. The demographics, the access to the land, the loss of forestry activity, and all that supports it. It's all in this mix that relates to the bears. I'm going to push back. We do not have an old forest here. It's just not, okay? It's not old growth forest. It's not early successional. It's not young, but it is not old. And I would rather, all due respect, I'm not going to buy that the forest is not providing enough food for the bears, and that's why they're here. There's plenty of food out there for bears. It changes. With beech years, apple years, it goes up. We all know this, but that's... I without a biologist, an actual biologist here, I'm going to say that I believe as a forester and what I know of bear biology, I just have a hard time believing that it's as simple as the forest has changed and our management of it is meaning that the bears can't get their food out there. I don't buy that. I just don't.
So is it just the fact that they are an opportunistic, I can't even say the word right now,
Opportunistic.
animal, and
Omnivorous, they're opportunivores, just like me.
rather than dig that stump up that's at 3,000 feet that's got honey in it, they're going to go to the garbage can that's at 800 feet.
I believe you're right. I believe that is exactly right. That there's plenty of those stumps and all the stuff.
So animals are getting just as lazy as humans?
Yes, it's they're smart. It's energetics. It's easier. It maybe it's not all that healthy for them, but it's the same. It's fast food and it's easy. And I don't know. Do you know a little, just slightly more than this, please?
Slightly. So, I mean, it's not the fault of the forest, but I would say if you have the same number. More bears can be supported on the landscape that Vermont had 30 years ago than the landscape that Vermont has now, and there are more bears now than there were there. I should say could be supported on the landscape without interacting with people.
Yeah, but they're saying that there's now 3,000 to 7,000 bears, and our bear population is healthy.
And they're saying that
15,
this is
20
where we want the bear population to be, which is... It seems problematic.
Rather than growing.
I want to say I hope you can. Any of you can bring in a biologist and make it clear that I'm wrong about this, because then I'd have one more reason to talk about and promote good forestry, because we're doing it for the bears. I want to be wrong about this. I don't see the beech disease. The beech is under a lot of threats, and it still throws nuts cyclically, but maybe over the long march of time, it's less productive. And you'd think that's like, okay, they're figuring out they can't get it from the beech nuts anymore. Maybe. And then, so again, I want to be wrong about this, because then I'd have another reason to promote good forestry.
I want to prove you wrong just as much as you want to be wrong.
All right, bring it. Bring it.
No,
you haven't yet.
Take like Alexander's Bowl, for instance, right? Where the deer camp used to be above your house.
Yeah.
Right? What is in that forest for those bears to eat?
Well, again, insects, grasses, forbs, roots.
But there's no insects there because there's no sunlight that hits the floor.
Oh, I don't know. Come on now. I mean, I think I just have a hard time believing that what happened in the time frame that's left them starving out there.
I will agree with you. This farm, Mike, and this, I think goes for deer and bear. There would be more ability to support those species in a true old growth forest than there is in a middle aged forest. Definitely. Maybe not as much as in a young forest, but that old forest that's having,
blowdowns and things happen to it.
There's no question.
There's more more for
and
them.
we don't have
Both
much
species
of that.
need it. We have
and
almost none
forestry
of
can
it.
help us get there. Oddly, I mean, how counterintuitive is that? We're going to make old forest by cutting some trees. Well, you can't speed up time, but you can speed up the development of these things that are in old forest. That's really cool. And if I have another reason to talk with people about doing that because it's good for the bears, I'm going to do it, and I'll be happy. But I'm not trying to be problematic here. I just think that. So yes, this middle-aged forest, I'll go there. I'd say, yeah, it's not as productive for bears as maybe a mix of young, middle, and old would be. I'm going to scratch the word maybe. It isn't as productive. And so that's maybe we're stuck in this pocket where, yeah, over the course of forest development, it is a little sterile. That's my point. And we can change that by sitting around waiting, or we can actually jumpstart it by managing the woods and meeting our wood product needs locally at the same time. That's win-win.
But Jamie, you started this whole conversation asking about spring bear season. And, you're on the board. Every regulation is some mix of biological and people and social. And I think that a spring bear season would just not be acceptable in Vermont and socially now.
I would 100% agree. But I'm just saying I've had a lot of people approach me saying, well, this is probably the solution to the problem. And this is why I'm asking you, because I'm not a bear biologist and I don't know the answer to that.
And if those people are hunters, I encourage you to ask them if they hunt bears, because I have found a surprising number of deer hunters and others who are concerned about the bear population but don't hunt bears themselves. And we've got it. Part of it is educating hunters to recognize how you handle a bear after you shoot it, so the meat is good, how you dress it, how you cook it, how you do all those things, and the fact that the bear population is very healthy, can withstand hunting pressure, and say to them, think about hunting bears.
It's a great point, Lewis. I'm guilty. I have to tell this quick story here. Is like I don't hunt bears. I've never hunted bears. I respect bear hunters. I like bear meat. I don't know what the situation. Like I don't even other than to say, maybe I want to be a bear someday. Like I think bears are amazing forest creatures, right? And so, but for whatever reason, I'm crazy for deer hunting, but I have no interest in hunting bears. I have no problem with you doing it. So that's just background. And what I would tell you is that this started to change. So I think and hearing you say this, Lewis, I think I'm gonna consider what you say, because a couple 3 years ago now, I had a nice buck hanging out back, and my daughter woke me up in the morning and said, "Dad, I think there's a bear trying to eat your deer." And I stepped out back in my undershorts, and sure enough, there's a big sow up in the tree trying to get at my buck. And I, jumped out and made noise. It was like, looked at me like, yeah, what? And it took a lot to get that bear off that deer. And then I had to, of course, take the deer. It wasn't over. I scared it away. But, and I'm just admitting, here I am, Mr. I don't hunt bears. Everything changed in that moment. I'm like, it was not interested in sharing. And so now I am thinking, well, you know what? What is, given this problem that's going on in our town, and do I, as a hunter, to your point, Lewis, maybe I have a responsibility to think a little differently about this.
To be fair, I don't hunt them either, but I think we got to get over ourselves as hunters and just realize you want more hunting opportunity, you want meat, you want to be responsible in managing species. There you go.
But I think you said the key word, and it's all about education. And I think a lot of hunters still don't have all of the knowledge about every species. And like you just said, if you want more hunting opportunities, then you need to work with Fish and Game to manage those species so that it can continue.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I have mixed feelings on it because I don't hunt bears either. I will. I tried to kill one there.
I was going to say, I heard one story.
Yeah, I tried to kill one son of a bitch there 2 years ago. He was on my lawn. What? He walked right by you, Cash, and the dog, 30 feet away, broad daylight, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was like, okay, that's a little too close. And then I had multiple encounters. Then he scratched the shit out of my Tacoma.
Well, this is where I'm coming from, yeah.
Garbage in the back of the truck, and I was like, you're dead. I pull into the driveway one day, and I look, and there's an apple tree right off the corner of the house. I mean, 10 feet off the corner of the house. Not 10 feet,
Not
probably
even.
20. and
Not even.
full of apples. And here he is, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, laying there, just gorging himself, soaking up apples. And I was like, you son of a bitch. They're inside, right? Pull up to the door. I'm like, Jamie, where's your crossbow? She loads it. I didn't know how to load a crossbow. She loads her freaking crossbow. I step around the corner of the house and he takes off. Oh, I snuck down through at that point and he'd already kind of boogered a little bit and he was down on the edge of the lawn. And I stood up and looked and he stood up on his back legs and looked at me, and I know him enough that I was like, got to my feet and I ran like a bat out of hell at him. And what'd he do? He went right up the frickin' tree. And I was like, you're done. And I don't know where to shoot a bear. I put it right behind his shoulder, pulled the trigger. Down that frickin' pine tree did he come. I ran the other way like a son of a bitch. And that, I didn't end up getting him. I felt so bad. I looked for him for 2 days. Rage broadhead right behind the shoulder, blew through him, blood everywhere. I looked for him for 2 days, all the way from my house to Route 100. Could not find him. Had the dog out there, everything. Couldn't find him. He was all of 350, I would say.
But he never came back.
Never came back. He's dead somewhere.
And that goes to Jamie's education point too. Like it's different shot placement.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, no, it definitely is. Definitely is. Next time, if there was a gun in the house, I would have hit him in the head, and we wouldn't have had to go very far.
But I will say it was a very, very brazen bear. He had absolutely no fear.
Zero fear.
Cash, the dog, and I were outside. He walked right by us on the lawn.
That bear today, no fear. 2 days ago, we're painting a big house in Robinson Springs. One of my guys is walking the patio around the outside of the house, looks over, and the first thing he thought was, oh shit, there's a black lab. Oh shit, there's a bear right there, 15 feet away from him, last year's cub, right? Broad daylight. Like no fear whatsoever.
Yeah,
just
good.
looking for food. Mitzi Spear had one come in. She was making granola. Came through her screen door. She had granola on
Came
the
right into
table.
the
She
house.
just made granola. Came through the screen door, grabbed the granola, and out the door it went.
My wife stepped out of our sauna and there was one right there.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah. I don't know. Why I say a baiting season in the fall might increase the opportunity or for people to get out there and hunt them, right? If there was something that could be done like on our state lands that surrounded us, right? To maybe draw those bears back up there when those bears are back up there and give people a little bit more opportunity to hunt them, maybe we could control it a little bit better. What I don't like is seeing an animal shot out of season or shot because it's hungry.
Or somebody taking a bad shot at it.
It just, yeah, that too. That happens. It just, yeah.
You had other questions?
I don't know. I had another one. I forgot. Keep talking. I'll think about it.
Keep talking.
Yeah.
Not a challenge for any of the three of us, as you picked up on.
The whole anti thing, and this is, feel free either one of you to come in on it. I'm going to just use this local habitat right here, half a mile down the road. Mike has seen it on Thomas Lane, right?
Oh, yeah.
We have a beaver issue, and rather than addressing the beaver issue and trapping the beavers and taking them, now we can't, right? There's this law, what is it, 50 feet? You can't trap a beaver within 50 feet of a trail, paved
Yes.
road, so
Well, I
on and so
don't think
forth.
that applies to nuisance.
Yeah, I think there are.
But because we have this lady in town, she's adamant. She's at the town office bitching and moaning about this stuff. The maple trees across the road have fence all the way around them because there's no more for these beavers to cut, right? We all know what happens when a beaver can't cut trees anymore, right? So they yank the beaver dam to put these beaver deceivers in it. That couldn't have pissed me off anymore, right? You took this perfectly good wetland, blew the beaver dam out, put these beaver deceivers in there. Meanwhile, they've cut the trees that are already there. The pond is now gone. There's not going to be a beaver that moves back into there, more than likely. That beaver that was there has moved on. All the trout in that stream, right? Gone. Ducks, the geese that were in there,
So they're
gone.
trying to save the beavers, and they don't want them relocated because it's inhumane, and they don't want to kill them because it's inhumane. But then you get rid of their habitat, and what are they going to do? It's also inhumane. So everything just seems completely counterintuitive.
So back to this whole thing, right? Where I'm going with this. Why do we give them a say? How do they have a say within the department? Like I go to her board meetings every now and again. I think I've gone to 2. And it baffles me that we give these antis time enough to speak their opinion. I don't know. I don't understand it. Like,
Do you mean because it's just asking, like you because it's because it's by design about hunting and fishing, and if you don't like that, why do you shouldn't have a say here? Or, because otherwise, I'm like, well, doesn't everybody have a say?
well,
I'll just
yeah,
start
sure.
with that.
Everybody's got a
Okay.
say in things, right?
Right.
But like, why are we giving them a say about science-based things?
I think
that
what you're trying to say is how you have biologists, you have a board, fish and game department that are managing
Why are we
a species
catering
of
to them?
animals, and why are you allowing people who don't have the same biological background to basically dictate what happens with the wildlife and wildlife management? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but we spend a lot of time, money, and resources fighting this war against these antis when more people's time is being spent fighting these antis than it is managing the resource.
So I have a lot of, as you might imagine, having done this for almost 8 years, I have a lot of thoughts about this. But I would say, in its most basic form, wildlife belongs to every resident, right? It's common. It's a shared resource. Every Vermont resident has a share in it and has a right to have a say in it. My objection is more about the venue than the message or the attempt to change things. The board and the department implement things made legal or illegal by the Vermont legislature, and it's at the legislature that I think people should go and make their case for or against. I happen to be very supportive of hunting. I believe it's intrinsically a good thing beyond all of the practical benefits it provides.
Amen.
But some people don't. They think hunting is intrinsically a bad thing. You should only allow when there's some practical reason for it. And that's not a perspective I share, but it's one, I can understand people's perspective on that. My objection to it is I don't know why all of this is focused on the board level when the board is just implementing a set of things made legal or illegal by the legislature.
Right. Our job is to basically pass bag limits and season dates. That's as far as we generally go.
Yep, bag limits, season dates, means of take. Yep, and if your goal, and I again, like I say, it's one I very much disagree with. But if your goal is to make bear hunting illegal, I can respect that perspective. I don't think it's right. I'll go to the legislature and argue against it, but I can respect that perspective. But bear hunting is legal because of choices the Vermont legislature has made, not because of choices the Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department or board has made. So this is my
And hunting
biggest,
is as we like to say, enshrined in our Constitution.
the first one, the first Constitution to have it. And so that's my biggest problem is it's trying to change through what's a statute through a regulatory process. And that might seem like an arcane or unimportant difference, but I think it's really important. You have a group of people who have a job that the public is intensely interested in because people care so much about wildlife in general and hunting and fishing in particular. But their job is basically technical. If I didn't think anybody should have porticos on their house, I wouldn't go to the Vermont Board of Architects and try to argue with them to make rules that made it impossible to build that way. I would go to the legislature and say, pass a law that says no more porticos. And this is my fundamental objection to it. And I think you're right. It does take a lot of time. It does take a lot of money. It does take a lot of effort. But I think what frustrated me was that I always felt like we were having an argument about the wrong things and at the wrong place. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so that's sort of my take on it. I think, like I say, I think hunting is intrinsically a good thing. I think in the absence of a strong social or biological reason to allow it, it should be encouraged and allowed and promoted because it's good.
Yeah.
For all the reasons we love it.
Well, and again, I think it comes back to education, and we have a huge population of people. I mean, I would say there have always been people moving into Vermont from other states, but in the last 4 years, we've had an influx of people. And I think a lot of those people are just uneducated around hunting, whether it's the purpose of hunting, biologically speaking, or the traditions of hunting. So again, it just comes back to education. And I think we just need more public forums that support actual factual
We just need
education.
people to understand it.
I mean,
right?
it was
They don't
just
have to
like
do it, but
Adrian's.
understand it.
It was just like Adrian's story of dragging a deer out of the woods, and the person walked how many miles with him, being like, "No, I want nothing to do with this," but asking questions. And by the end of it, he was like, "Wow, man, this was really, really incredible. Can I take a picture?" So it's all about education, and I think once people have the truth behind the sport, then there's understanding there, and that's where you find common ground, right? It's not about the fear tactics of posting. Everybody post your land because we can't have murderers.
Oh my gosh.
Shooting baby bears. I mean, it's this kind of stuff that If I wasn't a hunter, if I wasn't on the Fish and Game Board and I saw that post, I would be like, what? People are shooting baby bears? I'm an empath. I love people. I love animals. I don't want to see anybody hurt. I would be like, oh my God, post it immediately. Of course. Yeah. But it's out of misunderstanding. You don't know. You don't have the knowledge. And I think that, a part of the Fish and Game Department, I think they do a fantastic job. I have an immense amount of, gratitude for the amount of work that they do and all of the information that they present us at every single board meeting. It's incredible. And like sitting here listening to the two of you, this is why I joined this, because there's knowledge in everything. And I think that, a lot of what you mentioned about these antis coming to the meetings, it's not the avenue for it, it's not the place, but everybody has an opinion and everybody has the right to an opinion and expressing that opinion. Unfortunately, it should be at a different place. But I'm losing my train of thought here. I just think that it comes back to, time and resources. And the department, I think, has been so inundated with all of this whatever junk that they haven't had the time, the money, the resources maybe to put that energy toward forestry management and doing the things that actually matter. Maybe there should be more people like Northwoods Whitetails that teams up with the Fish and Game Department to be an avenue or a channel for education and getting the word out to people.
I'm going to donate Mike a chainsaw.
I've got two.
Northwoods Whitetails is going to give him one.
Nice. I could use an upgrade. I do have a couple.
I'm just kidding. Love you, buddy. S258, how do we get that so it never... How do you get it so it, can't come back?
New legislators?
It will always come back in some form in the foreseeable future.
So when you say foreseeable future, what do you mean? Could this thing
Rest of
come
our
back?
lives.
Really?
It's not going away.
Yeah.
I think we should expect a version of it in the next biennium, next January. Players will be different and a lot of change, but I don't know why you would think that, given how it came and who and what's behind it and the reception it got largely in the Senate, I don't see why you'd think it wouldn't. And most of those people are still there, the people who sponsored it. So you have to expect and be ready. And so educating and talking to everybody, and it's coming back.
I will say some of my close friends who still work at the department will probably throw things at me when I say this, but I will say that I think that the anti-hunting movement has sharpened the department. It has made the department a sharper, more skilled, and more nimble organization than it was when I arrived there, which was sort of the beginning of a lot of this stuff. And it's been painful. It's been very painful for some people who are very good people and very dedicated people who work there. But I think the department has become among the most careful, thoughtful, and skilled in dealing with an organized opposition as any department of state government through this process.
And closely on their heels would be the staff at Forest Parks and Recreation in response to a similar. It got a little, doesn't have the same headwinds. It's not been around quite as long in an organized way. But the opposition to cutting trees on public lands is it's analogous, and it's had the same effect of the records requests, hundreds of hours of professional time that we're paying for collectively, doing that instead of writing the plans and putting paint on trees and meeting with people and explaining the work and answering questions. Like they're not able to do that, and it's gotten them down. I was there when this was happening. It was very insulting. It made people upset. These are professionals who live for this stuff, and they're being told that they're bad and wrong, and so that's the bad side. But you're right, Louis. There is an upside that it sharpens them, and I think it has seen similarly a kind of they're gathering and they're realizing with some support that they are there with good reason and with rights, and that they're doing it really well. And but they've had to sharpen and be more nimble.
Years ago now, Mike and I had this conversation where it was like, well, trapping's just farther down the beach. Forestry is higher up the beach, but it's coming for forestry as well.
And it really did come. It's here. And I would say that's how do we get through it? It's hang tough. And Jamie, your idea of like the education, and we have to keep at it. And that also includes listening and speaking and acting differently than the same stuff just isn't working. We got to keep changing our ways. And
I'm going to throw a wrench into this too, and just like coming from like the health and beauty side of things. I think over the past few decades we've seen a huge uptick in this vegan, vegetarian trend. So, there's been a generation or two that have got on the bandwagon of, meat's bad for you. You shouldn't be eating meat. And, I think that people are starting to see, like the younger generation now are starting to see how incredibly bad that is for you. And, how as a human race, like our brain development needs meat. I mean, we need all of those nutrients and vitamins in the meat in order to sustain our brain power. And, I think the younger generations are now starting to see that. And I think that we saw that with COVID, with the uptick in the license sales and people getting more into hunting and fishing and being outdoors. And they're starting to see the health benefits of that. Actually, a really great book that I started reading is The Shotgun Conservationist that was introduced to me. And it is an incredible book for anybody that's looking for a good read. I mean, getting it on Audible, the guy is hilarious. He's out of Brooklyn. I think it's Brooklyn. He grew up a vegan, vegetarian, and then was introduced to hunting, and now he's a hunter. And then he, goes through, his journey of, making that change from being a vegetarian to a hunter, and then all of the science and, historical reasons and just everything that goes into, why you should hunt. And
there's one of my favorite things about being in the department was meeting hunters of all different kinds and hearing their stories. And I love the old guys who've been hunting their whole lives and learned from their fathers and their uncles and their grandfathers and all of that. But among my favorite were the vegan hunters who are like, yeah, I didn't eat any meat for 10 years. And then I decided that I wanted to eat meat, and the most ethical, most healthy way to get that meat was to hunt it. And so, I mean, I just love those stories. They were great to hear, and they give me hope.
Yeah, exactly. And what you're saying is just, I love hearing this. So this starts to feed into your golden age ahead. Like, I love this idea that we're going to come around, reawakening to the value of wild free-range meat as locally sourced food that's connected to your. I mean, I love that idea that's going to happen. That that it'll become trendy, and that then there's respect that comes with that, and further understanding of from the table back to the woods and the pursuit and the forestry that created the habitat and the connection, all the through lines, that's the hope. And maybe through the food and the experience is our best hope for leveraging that hope,
Absolutely. Well, I think you see on social media too, the trends of, farming, agriculture, hunting, logging, all of these these things are gaining in popularity. And so I think that, you know, when you see it on Instagram, everybody's like, well, I want to do this. So I think you're going to start seeing more people get.
We have ways to go. I love telling this story about going to a fancy restaurant in Burlington where they feature farm to table, and they also feature wood-fired cooking, and there's a lot of wood in the facility. So there's like cordwood stacked up. It's split really nicely. So it's part of the atmosphere and the ambiance, the decor, even in the restaurant. And it's how they cook most of the food is over fire. And I get the menu, and it's telling me every detail of the farm where this cheese came from, and the tomato came from here, and the arugula came from there. Lewis doesn't even know what arugula is. It's going on and on. Right, about all the food and the source and the local this and the farmer that. And I said to the waiter, like, I was like, do you know, like, where did the wood come from that you're cooking with? And that's so cool. And she was like, that's a great question. I don't know. I'll ask, to her credit. Manager came out and he was like, that's really interesting. Let me look into this. And they finally came back out and said it's from, Clifford's down in Heinsberg. And I said, that's a great story. It's locally sourced from family woodlots, creating habitat. Why don't you have that on the menu? You're celebrating the food. So you go ooh and ah over the cheese, but you look right past the cutting board that it's on, right? So we're way behind.
That's a great point.
Like why? And they to their credit, they were like, that's really great. We should tell that story too. So like, yeah, I get it. You put food in your body. And so like, we're really careful we're likely to think more about that, but we're got to take that next step to be, we put air and water in our body too. That comes from the woods, and we use an enormous amount of wood, and it's part of the ag scene. And so why can't we celebrate the wood with the food?
Well, and coming full circle with what you do with forestry, you need the forest for everything that we need as humans.
Major fist bump right there.
Should we end it on that?
Yep. Yeah, it's a good note.
Definitely give Jamie the last word.
All right, guys, until the next one.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
Thanks, guys.